This is Conversations with Women in Sales, an award-winning podcast created by Barbara Giamanco, who hosted the first 67 episodes. Listen to interviews with amazing women about their journeys in their sales careers, often discussing sales leadership tips, ideas, and strategies. We aim to inspire women to consider a sales career and for some women to grow into sales leadership. Men, we appreciate your allyship. And now, your host, Lori Richardson.
I'm excited to be here today with Nia Khatri. Nia's title now is Enterprise Sales Partnerships and Strategic Growth, West Coast USA at Logitech. Do I get that right?
Yeah, it's a mouthful.
It is a mouthful. And I'm going to ask you exactly what you do a little bit later. But I'm really happy to have you on. You and I have talked back and forth by email, which has been great. And we're finally getting a chance to meet virtually. I'm curious because you have an interesting backstory that we want to hear all about. And you've been in a sales role for a while, but you started at Colorado College. And I'm curious about how you got there. And I'm familiar with Colorado College because my son was a hockey coach there for a few years, and it's a beautiful place in Colorado Springs. But tell me a little bit about your journey.
Yeah. Thanks, Lori, for having me on this podcast. I'm excited to talk to you and the viewers on my journey into sales. So geographically, I was born and raised in Kathmandu in Nepal, so thousands of miles away east from here. And I've been brought up and raised in different parts of the world. I've lived in cities in the UK, in India, Toronto, and of course now in San Francisco. So I wanted to move to the US specifically for a liberal arts education degree because back at home in Europe, we go from high school to a more traditional way of education. So you have to decide if you want to be a doctor or an engineer when you're 14, 15. And I thought that was pretty crazy to decide at that time. So the US obviously has these liberal arts education program. Yeah. So I got into an international high school program in India that created a pipeline for me to come to the US. And Colorado College was one of the colleges that partnered with that high school and gave me a 100% scholarship. So I couldn't say no.
Oh, that's great. And it's a pretty place, don't you think?
It is. And there's mountains in Nepal and like hills and mountains in Colorado. So for a Nepalese, it was very similar in terms of demographic.
Yeah. And some cold weather and snow in the winter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then your first job out of school was the sales job?
So you mean like the first full-time 40 hours a week job?
Yeah.
Yeah. So my first full-time job was a sales job, and I worked for ADP during that time.
And how did that happen? Did you think sales, or did you know what sales is? Because I'm always fascinated to find out how people, think about sales when they're in college and how they get into a role, because so many of us did go into sales out of college.
To understand why I went to sales, I think people should know that I was a very poor international student, even with the 100% scholarship. So flying back home meant an investment of $2,000 every time. So knowing that, I had to find a college job that paid the most amount of money compared to the other campus jobs out there, which is how I ended up in Colorado College's annual gift giving department. And my sole job was to call alumni and ask for donations.
So that was a real sales job, wasn't it?
It was. And so I did not know it was a sales job. I just thought this was donation. You don't really think about what you're really doing. And so somehow I was really good at this job. I did not fear the rejections because perhaps I had a very clear goal in my head, which was that $2,000 airfare to Nepal. And I was very motivated by the commission structure that they had to offer. I'm pretty sure they also incentivized us to have, I think, a free lunch or a free breakfast buffet as part of their incentive and commission structure during that time. For college students, that was a big deal.
Yeah.
And then through that process, I was also expediting my network and thoroughly enjoyed the process of building relationships through the phone back then. So that sort of paved a path for me to think about a full-time job in the professional world in sales because I knew I liked earning money. I knew that I was good at fostering relationships. And I thought that there was a way better way of making money without it being related to the company structure, which meant like commission structure. Like I just thought, wow, if I put in X amount of work, I get paid based on that hard work. So if I put in 1,000% of work, then maybe there's a job out there that can pay me out that way. So I intentionally went into sales, which seems like the more unique story for us compared to the other sales professionals that I've met.
Yeah, I intentionally went into sales too because I was a single mom and I was a teacher and I couldn't afford raising my family on my teacher income. And so I realized I had grown up in a family-run business and my grandmother was my role model and she was so good at selling. And I just realized I got into technology sales and I just knew that I could do it. So like you, I'm not sure where that confidence came from because there's so many people who seem to not have that confidence. You and I have the same thing. I think that you knew you could do it. I knew I could do it and we did it. So that's great. That's really interesting. And then how did you progress through to, you ended up moving companies and now tell us about your role now and what you did previously. Logitech.
Yeah. So I was with ADP for almost 2 years. I made a boatload of money. And for a 22-year-old, that was so much money. I put it all towards retirement, I remember. And I also had mentors that told me what to do with it in investment. But I knew that I wanted to do more. I think I got bored really easy with the gig that I had. And I knew that I had an entrepreneurial spirit and I needed to do something that allowed me to maybe challenge the status quo and create new processes or oversee new things. And at ADP, they had a structure that was already built and it was really difficult to be creative around that. So I decided to part ways and move to Logitech at an incredible time because the company was transitioning from traditional D2C over to D2B, so direct to consumers, to direct to business. And I was hired as the first sales rep by the director himself.
Wow.
And that expedited my career exponentially because I was a chief of staff very quickly. Then I went from SMB to mid-market to enterprise. Then I was doing channel partnerships. So it was definitely an experience like working for a startup, but we had the safety net and financial runway from a big established company.
Yeah.
So it was an incredible opportunity and sometimes timing is everything. So I'm glad that happened for me because I had expedited my positions to where I am today. Because if I compare myself with people that have similar positions, they are maybe 5-6 years more older. So I definitely feel lucky that I had that experience at Logitech.
You're on the fast path, huh?
I was not knowing that it was going to be a fast path.
Yeah.
And it was difficult because I came from a very structured sales environment to a structured established company without the sales infrastructure. So I was looking into how do I pay myself? What does commission structure look like? And I didn't think that I needed to do that. I was also looking at CRM dashboards and was part of those conversations with IT and sales ops and understanding how do you move your leads over to opportunities? What does the key metrics look like? So I definitely got exposure to every single side of the business from the ground up.
Oh, that is so interesting. And you did so many different roles in terms of you worked with SMB and you worked with mid-market and enterprise. And what a great training ground, because I guess I would ask if you could pick which market do you like the most, what you're doing now or?
That's a very difficult question because you can answer it in different ways. There's now different verticals, right?
Yeah, right.
You can also be selling public sector, education, and as you mentioned, SMB, mid-market, enterprise. I think at ADP, it was more fun selling to the SMB market because the SMB market were people around me. So we had zip codes that we were responsible for. So my zip code was actually in Mission and North Beach, which were areas that I went out with friends. So I was selling to restaurants and bars that I frequented and visited during the weekend. So I just thought that was such a cool way of kind of building that partnership.
Yeah.
And I was also selling to seafood distributors. So I was going up to the Fisherman's Wharf and selling to seafood distributors, and they gave me lobsters and crabs as just as a thank you for helping them. So I think in that world, SMB for sure, because I was just around SMB and I was learning San Francisco through them.
Yeah.
But today at Logitech, I am with Fortune 50 companies. I like that. I enjoy that, the complex sales cycle more because I'm learning so much. And now with the transformation with AI and how companies are adopting, you get to experience that being part of the Fortune 500 sales cycle and how they're deploying it and adopting it from the IT level, from the C level, throughout the companies. And then it's more of a strategic conversation because there could be some partnerships that come out from them as well. So I think
you're looking forward to more AI and technology enhanced. Some people are scared about.
I know it's definitely a very interesting time. I wasn't part of the .com boom, but I've been told multiple times by my mentors, managers, that it seems like we're going through something very similar, plus the 2008 crash. So it's happening all at once and we are rapidly evolving. But I really think that the AI, in using it correctly, we can optimize for so many things that we just didn't have the ability to do. And I come from Nepal, so we really need AI to streamline a lot of our government processes. And that's how I'm thinking about it. If I'm in San Francisco selling to Fortune 500 companies that can actually make that impact, their impact can be felt globally and even in my homeland in Nepal. So I'm very excited about this.
That's great. Is any of your family here in the US?
No. So everyone's still at home in Kathmandu, Nepal. But my mom has two sisters. So one's in DC, one's in Hawaii. So not bad places to visit.
Yeah, correct. Oh, that's good. But I bet you miss your family. Do you get to go and visit periodically?
If you'd asked me this question like before the pandemic, I would have said maybe once a year. But after the pandemic, we went into remote work and hybrid mode. And I also got into the position of a strategic managerial role. So it allowed me to have more flexibility in terms of working from anywhere. Now, I would say twice a year. It's still a very long journey, Lori. Like it's still 20 hours. And then you leave on Sunday, you arrive there on Tuesday. It takes you 48 hours to get over jet lag. If you want to take a 10 a.m. San Francisco call, it has to be 2 a.m. Nepal time. So there's a lot of challenges with that as well. But thank God for Zoom and video conferencing.
Yeah, at least the tech is there if you can figure out a way to make it work. That's interesting. So have you found more women in sales roles? You don't have to speak specifically to your company, but I guess the women that you know that are in sales, are you finding that, does it seem better? Or does it seem like it's still a bro culture?
I think in my personal experience at ADP, it was almost 50-50. We had a cohort. So I was part of the 2017 cohort. And so it was 50-50. But when I saw the managers, that's when it was not so much 50-50.
Yeah.
It was still very male dominated. But for me, there was also hardly people that looked like me and talked like me. So Nepali, brown, South Asian immigrant. So not having leaders that look like me became a problem because it was just really hard for me to think about my future in a career that I was so passionate about and not seeing people that look like me. So going through those reflection periods where I said, if there's nobody that looks like me represented in the top, will I even have a chance? But no matter how good I am, no matter how much I sell, is that even possible? So I think there still seems to be that divide. even as a millennial.
Yeah. And that's a common thing I've heard a number of women saying, and a number of people that are intersectionality in terms of their backgrounds and being a woman as well. That's interesting. What do you think would help get more women into sales and sales leadership?
So my approach has been reaching out to male managers that have like sales executive positions, stalking them extensively in LinkedIn, and reaching out to introduce myself and building those relationships, because we know that the industry is so male dominated, and that if they find themselves in a hiring position, they would perhaps reach out to their male colleagues because, again, that's how dominated the industry is. So I thought if I maybe reached out and intervened at a right time, maybe they would refer me instead, or maybe they would think about a female colleague instead of a male one. And so by some magical network inclusion effect, I have been doing that, and I've been doing that for a number of years, which has led me to believe that some of the male colleagues that I know in higher positions at different companies come back to me and ask me if I know someone suitable for that position. And I have a lot of women colleagues, and I would just recommend and refer them. So it's about shape shifting and changing that. I don't think I'm pointing fingers at my male colleague. It's just because their network is also all male. So how do you
think about it? They don't think about it.
They don't think about it. And how do you organically get them to just refer someone? Because at the end of the day, the best candidate should take that role, regardless of gender. But if they just have male colleagues around them,
women never apply.
That would never apply. So I've been doing them a favor, maybe, through this like magical network inclusion effect that I like to call. That's why I'm very fortunate to have a lot of my male mentors in the sales professional world.
Yeah. Without male mentors, we won't have any change. That's for sure. And I love that what I hear you saying is that you're recommending other women that you know when someone approaches you, when a male manager says, hey, do you know anybody? And the guys have done that really well for years. And we need to get better at it. And so I love that you're doing that. I love that you're young and you're doing it already. You don't have to wait to gain more wisdom about that, because I know that's something a number of us have gotten figured out as we've gotten older, but I didn't know it when I was your age. I know I didn't know it.
And there's a lot of resources, even with your podcast, right? I think that's a network effect, and you learn from podcasts and you meet people in networking events, and then you take their advice and recommendations. And I always tell people that I always love networking with people that are like 10, 15 years older than me, because they're always going to have some sort of what if moment and a recommendation, like where you said, I wish I had maybe networked with a male colleague. Maybe things would have been maybe different for me. We don't know. Yeah. And so I love doing that because I just want to execute on that ASAP and not have to worry about that later in the future. But yeah, like I think I found a lot of the professional networks for women, including yours, later on, because I was surrounded by a lot of male colleagues and male mentors. Yeah. So they're not going to be part of WIR. And
when you're in a bubble, when you're in a company, you're in a bubble.
Right.
You get out of it. And I think the pandemic brought that about, is that people started networking online, which never happened before. There weren't some of the organizations that there are now, or they were not as prominent. So it's a lot easier now to connect with people virtually, which is a great benefit of that time. There's a lot of bad things that happened, but that was something that accelerating technology was really amazing, I think. I'm happy for that part of that story. What do you think in terms of, do you read books? Do you have book recommendation for anyone, or podcast?
Yeah. So I listen to the podcast specifically at the gym, and I just find that very useful because I'm also pushing my body physically, but mentally I'm also getting so much insight. And so you'll always find me just standing next to the squat rack and just putting some notes down because I learned something interesting during that time. So I listened to your podcast. I've been listening to you guys since the peak of the pandemic because obviously we had to go for our forced walks and I needed something.
Right.
So that was during the time when I was in Canada. The other podcast that I listen to at the gym is by Howard Brown. I think it's Rev Ops. I love that. They share little nuggets and like what's happening in the revenue side. And I'm learning about how AI tools are coming into our sales and revenue and sales enablement marketplace. And I take that to my management and also let them know that, hey, have we heard about XYZ? This can help us with our forecast or what have you. So I'm always learning new things that way. And the book that I always love going back to is a book called Thinking Fast and Slow.
Oh, yeah.
Have you read the book?
Yes.
Yeah. It's by a psychologist and Nobel Prize winner, Daniel Kahneman. And so the book explores like two systems of thought and how it drives people to make decisions and judgments. And then it covers like a wide range of topics around like human decision making, the biases, including overconfidence and loss aversion. And so obviously this is very applicable when you're talking to people and selling, but also applicable to anybody for professional and personal growth. So I always go back to this book once a year.
Oh, that's wonderful. That is a great recommendation. I know that you also are really passionate about salary transparency. So
I'll be
passionate. We all should be. And you have found, you were telling me that you've found that men seem to be more comfortable sharing about their OTE than maybe women are, at least in your circle.
Yeah, at least in my circle, that seems to be the case. I just don't want to wake up one day and realize that I'm like playing catch up with my male counterparts.
It's horrible.
It is horrible. It's probably a gut wrenching feeling when you realize that. And so to play catch up at a company when you're like 15 years apart from a salary perspective is really difficult because at that point, you either have to ask your manager for a 50% raise or leave the company and start over. So knowing this, I reached out to my peers, trying to understand how they were compensated and also to learn best practices for salary negotiation. And I learned that my male colleagues were more open and direct. There was no like awkward dance that I had to do in trying to get them to tell me what they were making. Whereas for my female colleagues, they were not comfortable or they wanted to think about it and reach back after thinking about it. I don't know.
And I think that goes back to how we were raised.
Absolutely.
And kind of to brag, they've been taught to, hey, if I got a big raise, I'm going to make sure everybody knows about it.
Right.
And we were taught to be kind and, don't hurt people's feelings and don't ask them about money. I know that happened to me and my family.
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah, there's like how you grew up. I think also cultural differences, family values. But if we're talking about how both San Francisco and New York just passed the laws right now. So when you look at job descriptions, they have to legally provide salary transparency in the range. So if companies and like cities and states are doing it, it's obvious that like people should. And then I had an interesting experience where I reached out to a male colleague. We were chatting and he learned that I was making more. And it was also a learning opportunity. So sometimes it works the other way. We always think the male colleagues are earning more, but sometimes we can also potentially be helping them. And through that process, we just realize how the company compensates us. And there's different bands. So we learned more. And I think that was just a very insightful conversation. And so now we are each other's sounding board. We have moved to different companies now. So we call each other during the annual performance bonus time and say, hey, how much are you going to ask your manager this time? Yeah. But at least there's someone out there who's also doing it with you. So it doesn't feel too lonely.
Oh, that's good. And then there are also websites now like RepView where you can see what people are making in other companies, which I didn't have when I was starting out. And I have to tell you, Nia, I thought I was so smart because I figured well, I'm going to be in sales and I'm going to make the same commission as the guys. And I was all set. And I didn't realize that I could have negotiated my salary. Nobody told me. And so then later I'd find out that my peers are all making more than me. I was so disappointed.
Yeah. And it goes back to if you don't ask, you won't get.
Yeah. And I was a single parent. They had wives at home taking care of their kids. And I'm telling you, it was very frustrating, but it's a lesson I learned. And to this day, if I'm asked to do anything, I'll say, is there anybody else what are you paying? It's always top of mind. It's almost like a chip on my shoulder.
Yeah. And that's a good thing to take away from that experience for sure. We had the same thing at ADP too. And I just wanted a job right after college. So I didn't really think about benefits. Or I didn't think about equity and all these different things that now you have the knowledge and experience to think about. I had the same experience like you. So I think it's changing. I think with more conversations like this through podcasts and resources and people just talking about it, hopefully we always know that you just have to negotiate. That's just part of the job and part of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. So what should our listeners know about Nepal? Tell us about your homeland.
Wow, a very loaded question. I think first off, I've heard a lot of people say that they've been to Nepal and then they confuse it with Naples.
No way.
And it's two different countries, two different regions. I've also heard that people think that it's part of India. And then I just have to say, no, we are like our own sovereign nation. We were never colonized by the Brits. But Nepal has a very similar like cultural history like India does, in Bangladesh and Pakistan, all these like South Asian countries. So besides having like the tallest mountain in the world, Mount Everest, I think we have really delicious food. And a lot of our food is actually vegan. When vegans come to Nepal, they don't have to go to vegan restaurants. They can just go to any Nepali restaurants.
Yeah.
And obviously, as in California, the vegan numbers are just climbing.
Yeah.
So I think any Nepali restaurant would do really well here.
That's great. I have so enjoyed getting to know you a little bit and hope to get to know you even more. I just wanted to let people know, can they reach out to you on LinkedIn if they want?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Reach out to me on LinkedIn and we can have a virtual coffee, or if you're in San Francisco, we can meet in person as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. So it's Nia Khatri. She's with Logitech and in the enterprise sales partnerships area. And what do you do there? Tell us what you're doing in enterprise sales partnerships.
So right now where I'm focused is our group was focused on video collaboration as a group. So think about the webcams and headsets. So we were in a gold rush period during pandemic because everybody needed a webcam and a headset and mice and keyboard. And that's when I moved to Canada and it was Wild West. It was pretty crazy. So that was the group. That's what the business group I represented. And last year we decided to add other categories like mice and keyboards into this group so that we could sell to enterprise customers. So that's the group that I sit in, but I also have the responsibilities for growing and maintaining partnerships that Logitech has on the cloud video service. So think Zoom, Microsoft, and Google.
Oh, that's great. Nia Khatri, thank you so much for being here. We've really enjoyed having you, and continued success to you as you move in your career up and onward.
Thank you, Laurie. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Conversations with Women in Sales. You can find all of our episodes at womensalespros.com/podcast. Help us spread the word, and let's change the face of B2B sales.